What if the very ground beneath your feet was once considered a living, breathing map of the divine? A world not of inert rock and soil, but one where every mountain peak was a throne for a god, every river a sacred artery of life, and every forest a gateway to another realm. This wasn't a world of fantasy. It was the profound reality for countless ancient cultures, a perspective that fundamentally shaped the course of human history. Long before satellites and GPS, our ancestors navigated by a different kind of compass, one guided by faith, myth, and a deep, reverent connection to the natural world. They didn't just see a landscape, they read a story written by the heavens and the earth, a story that told them where to build their homes, where to plant their crops, and where to worship their gods. This is the captivating realm of sacred geography, a concept that goes far beyond simple cartography to explore how spiritual beliefs were literally carved into the terrain we walk upon. From the moment early humans looked up at the stars and saw patterns, or watched a river flood its banks with life-giving water, they began to weave narratives of divine intervention and cosmic order. The Nile wasn't just a river to the ancient Egyptians, it was the god Hapi, a benevolent force whose annual inundation dictated the rhythm of life, death, and rebirth. The mighty Himalayas were not merely impressive rock formations to the people of India and Tibet. They were the abode of Shiva, a place where heaven touched earth. This worldview transformed the entire planet into a temple, with specific locations acting as altars, thresholds, and portals. Settlements weren't chosen merely for strategic defense or resource availability, though those were factors, but because a shaman had a vision, an oracle received a message, or the stars aligned over a particular valley, marking it as blessed. In this video, we are embarking on an extraordinary journey to unravel these ancient mysteries. We will walk the celestial pathways laid out by megalithic builders, decipher the hidden codes in temple alignments, and explore the ritual landscapes that directed the flow of entire civilizations. We'll discover why cities rose at the feet of sacred mountains and why pilgrims traversed vast distances to bathe in certain rivers. But this isn't just a story about the past. The echoes of sacred geography are still with us today, in the place names we use, the sites we preserve, and the deep, often unspoken, awe we feel in certain natural places. By understanding how our ancestors saw the world, we might just rediscover a way to see our own place within it with fresh eyes, rekindling a sense of wonder for the planet we call home. So let's step into this forgotten world together, where every mountain tells a story and every river holds a secret waiting to be heard. To truly grasp this concept, we must first step out of our modern mindset, where we often see the land as a resource to be used or a space to be developed. For ancient peoples, the world was not a passive backdrop but an active, living participant in their lives. A mountain was not just a geological formation, it was a deity, an ancestor, or a pillar holding up the sky. A river was not merely a source of water, it was a divine serpent, a goddess, or a path to the underworld. This animistic perspective infused the entire world with agency and meaning, creating what scholars call a sentient landscape. Every feature had a story, a personality, and a power that demanded recognition and respect. This wasn't a vague feeling. It was a concrete reality that directly informed every major decision a community made. This world, you gave rise to a unique form of mapping, one far more complex than simply drawing coastlines and borders. Sacred geography was about charting the invisible. It was the practice of projecting the divine order of the cosmos, the realms of gods, ancestors, and spirits onto the physical terrain of the earth. A perfect example is found in the Inca Empire, where the entire capital city of Cusco was designed in the shape of a puma, a sacred animal. The surrounding valley was divided into lines called sects, which radiated out from the main temple like spiritual arteries. These lines connected hundreds of huacas, or sacred spots, which could be a spring, an unusual rock formation, or a hilltop. This system wasn't just a religious map, it was a calendar, a social organizer, and a way to manage water rights and agricultural cycles, all woven together by a sacred understanding of the land. We can see this sophisticated interplay between belief and practicality across the globe. In ancient Egypt, the Nile River's predictable flooding was the literal lifeblood of the civilization. But the Egyptians didn't just see this as a natural cycle, they worshipped it as the god Hapi. Their entire concept of the universe was mirrored in their geography. They lived in Kemet, the black land of fertile soil which represented life and order. It was surrounded by Deseret, the red land of the desert, which represented chaos and death. This belief directly influenced where they built their cities, their tombs, and their temples, ensuring their architecture reinforced this cosmic battle between order and chaos. The pyramids at Giza, for instance, are not only astronomically aligned but are also situated on the edge of the desert, a literal and symbolic threshold between the world of the living and the world of the dead. This deep connection meant that settlement was never a random act. Choosing a place to live was a sacred undertaking. It required divination, omens, and the approval of the gods. In ancient China, the practice of feng shui, which means wind and water, was developed to identify the most auspicious locations for homes, villages, and graves. Specialists would analyze the flow of Qi, or life force, through the landscape, looking for protective mountain ridges behind a site and welcoming open spaces in front, with meandering water sources to nourish the energy. A location with good feng shui promised health, prosperity, and harmony for its inhabitants. Similarly, in ancient Greece, before founding a new colony, leaders would consult the oracle at Delphi, seeking divine guidance on where to build. The chosen site would then be ceremonially plowed and its boundaries sanctified, transforming a wild space into a civilized one, but one that remained deeply connected to the sacred order of the universe. Ultimately, sacred geography was the foundational layer upon which all other aspects of ancient life, from trade and agriculture to politics and art, were built. It was the invisible framework that gave the world its meaning and told people not just where they could live, but where they should. But these myths were far more than just entertaining stories around a campfire. They were the very blueprints for civilization. A community wouldn't just hear a tale about a goddess being born from a spring and then forget it. That spring would instantly become a holy site, a place of pilgrimage, and a highly desirable location to build a home, precisely because it was now seen as touched by the divine. This connection between story and stone is powerfully illustrated in ancient Greece. The towering peak of Mount Olympus wasn't just considered a picturesque mountain. It was believed to be the literal, physical home of the 12 most powerful gods in the Greek pantheon, from Zeus, the king of the gods, to Hera, Aphrodite, and Ares. This belief wasn't abstract. It meant that the entire surrounding region of Thessaly was considered sacred ground, a place under the direct gaze and protection of the divine. Naturally, this attracted a concentration of temples, oracle sites, and eventually thriving cities like Dion, which served as a major religious center where people would gather to worship and seek favor from the gods they believed lived just overhead. The mythology didn't just describe the mountain, it actively shaped the human landscape around it, dictating patterns of settlement for centuries. This phenomenon repeats itself across the globe with astonishing consistency. In India, the river Ganges is not merely a body of water. According to Hindu scripture, it is the goddess Ganga who descended from heaven to earth. The myth describes how the god Shiva caught her mighty flow in his matted hair to prevent her power from shattering the planet, gently releasing her to flow across the plains and bring life and purification. This profound narrative transformed the entire river into one of the most sacred entities on earth. Cities like Varanasi and Haridwar were established exclusively along its banks, not just for water, but for salvation. Millions of people have lived, died, and pilgrimaged to these spots for millennia, believing that bathing in the Ganges washes away sin and that dying near it ensures liberation from the cycle of rebirth. The mythology provided an irresistible spiritual pull that overrode all other practical considerations, creating a continuous ribbon of human habitation along its course that exists to this day. Beyond simply marking a spot as special, these stories served a crucial practical function. They encoded vital survival information into a memorable and easily transmitted format. An ancient myth about a dragon living in a particular swamp wasn't just a spooky story. It was a very effective way to tell generations of children to avoid that area, which might be filled with malaria-carrying mosquitoes or unstable ground. A legend about a generous river spirit who provided fish during a certain season was a way of preserving knowledge about annual migration patterns. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia provide a stunning example of this with their Dreamtime stories. Their songlines are intricate epic tales that describe the journeys of ancestral creator beings across the landscape. As these beings walked, they formed rivers, hills, and waterholes through their actions. To navigate the vast and often featureless outback, an individual would memorize the songs, which act as a verbal map, detailing the location of critical water sources, food plants, and landmarks. The mythology was quite literally a navigation system and a repository of ecological knowledge, ensuring survival in a harsh environment. The story and the geography were inseparable. To know one was to know the other. This deep intertwining of narrative and nature created a powerful moral and spiritual framework for ancient societies. By building your city where a hero was said to have defeated a monster, or where a god first gave the gift of agriculture, you were aligning your community with the cosmic order. You were planting your roots in a place that had meaning and purpose within the grand story of the universe, which fostered a profound sense of belonging, identity, and responsibility. It meant the land wasn't a commodity to be exploited, but a sacred trust to be cared for, because it was the physical manifestation of divine stories. This worldview ensured that human expansion happened within a context of reverence, weaving settlements into the existing tapestry of myth and meaning rather than simply imposing upon it. The landscape became a living storybook, and every community a character within its eternal pages. Now, if mythology provided the story, then the stars provided the clock and the compass. Ancient peoples looked up and saw not random points of light, but a grand, predictable celestial mechanism, a divine clockwork that governed the seasons, the rains, and the very passage of time itself. Aligning their world with this cosmic order wasn't just an intellectual exercise, it was a spiritual imperative, a way to ensure that human life resonated in harmony with the universe. This profound desire to mirror the heavens on Earth led to some of the most breathtaking architectural and urban planning achievements in human history, where the placement of a single stone or the orientation of an entire city was dictated by the motion of the stars. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza, a monument that has captivated humanity for millennia. Its sheer size is staggering, but its precision is perhaps even more astonishing. The sides of the pyramid are aligned with the four cardinal directions with an accuracy within a fraction of a degree. How did they achieve this? Egyptologists believe the builders used the circumpolar stars, specifically Kochab and Mizar in the constellation Ursa Minor, which circle the celestial pole and never dip below the horizon. By tracking their rotations, ancient surveyors could pinpoint true north with incredible accuracy. But it goes deeper than just orientation. The so-called air shafts emanating from the king's and queen's chambers were once thought to be for ventilation, but we now understand they were precisely angled to target specific stars. The southern shaft from the king's chamber pointed directly to the belt of the constellation Orion, which the Egyptians associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife and rebirth. This wasn't a random feature, it was a carefully designed celestial conduit, meant to allow the soul of the deceased pharaoh to ascend directly to join the eternal, imperishable stars. The pyramid complex was not a tomb in a simple sense. It was a machine for resurrection, its very stones permanently locked into a sacred dialogue with the night sky. This practice of celestial mimicry reached a spectacular zenith in the Americas with the Maya. Their city of Chichen Itza is a masterclass in sacred astronomy made manifest in stone. The centerpiece, the pyramid known as El Castillo, is a breathtaking solar calendar. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the setting sun casts a shadow across the western balustrade that creates the undulating illusion of a giant serpent slithering down the staircase to join with its stone head at the base. This represented the descent of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent deity, a moment that drew and still draws thousands of witnesses. The entire event marries precise astronomical observation with profound spiritual symbolism, turning a day on the calendar into a living, breathing religious experience. But the Maya didn't stop there. Their famous Caracol Observatory, with its narrow slit windows, is precisely aligned to track the path of Venus, a planet they associated with war and conflict. The movements of Venus directly influenced their timing for warfare and royal ceremonies. The city itself, its temples and observatories, was a permanent, stone-recorded almanac, ensuring that every aspect of civic and spiritual life moved in lockstep with the cosmos. This celestial connection profoundly influenced not just where people built, but also how they moved across the landscape. In North America, the great earthwork complexes of the Hopewell culture, like those in Ohio, feature enormous geometric enclosures and aligned mounds that point to key lunar rising and setting points. These sites were likely gathering places for people from across a vast region who would travel there to participate in ceremonies tied to these celestial events. The pathways they walked to get there became, in effect, sacred routes, their journeys timed to the rhythm of the moon. Similarly, in the ancient British Isles, the processional avenue leading to Stonehenge aligns with the summer solstice sunrise, suggesting that pilgrims traveled along this specific path at a specific time of year to witness the sun's rays pierce through the monument's central arch. The journey itself was part of the ritual, a terrestrial movement choreographed by a celestial event. For these cultures, the sky was not a distant abstraction. It was the ultimate authority, the original GPS, guiding their footsteps, their construction, and their very understanding of their place in a beautifully ordered universe. And just as the stars charted a course across the heavens, the rivers below carved sacred pathways through the earth, acting as the very lifeblood of civilization in more ways than one. To our modern eyes, a river is a source of water, a means of transport, a natural boundary. But to the ancient world, a river was a living, breathing deity, a divine artery pulsing with spiritual power as well as life-giving water. This dual identity of practical necessity and profound sanctity made riverbanks some of the most coveted and densely settled places on the planet. The relationship was symbiotic. Civilizations flourished because of the river's bounty, and in return, they worshipped the river as a god, weaving its essence into their identity, their rituals, and their very understanding of the cosmos. Nowhere is this divine connection more vividly illustrated than in ancient Egypt, a civilization that was quite literally the gift of its river. The Nile was not just a resource, it was the god Hapi, a benevolent deity often depicted as a portly figure with heavy breasts, symbolizing abundance and nourishment. The annual inundation was not merely a flood, it was Hapi's annual act of creation, a deliberate and generous outpouring of fertile black silt that transformed the barren desert into the lush, life-sustaining Kemet, the Black Land. This predictable, life-giving cycle dictated the entire rhythm of Egyptian existence. It was the foundation of their calendar, dividing the year into the flood season, the growing season, and the harvest season. Naturally, every major city, Memphis, Thebes, Luxor, clustered along this narrow, fertile ribbon. Temples were built facing the river, and their designs often incorporated symbolic elements of the primordial waters of creation, known as the Nun. The river was their highway, their larder, and their direct connection to the divine, a constant, flowing reminder that their survival was a sacred covenant. This pattern of riverine reverence was simultaneously unfolding thousands of miles away in the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, the rivers were seen as gifts from the gods, but with a more tempestuous personality. Unlike the predictable Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates could flood violently and unpredictably, which was reflected in the mythology. These rivers were associated with powerful, sometimes capricious gods like Inca, the god of wisdom and water. The world's first major cities like and Uruk emerged from the mudbanks of these rivers. Water was central to every aspect of life, including their most sacred rituals. The famous Ziggurat of a massive step temple tower, was not just a structure pointing to the heavens. It was also a symbolic mountain connecting the earth to the Abzu, the freshwater ocean believed to exist beneath the earth from which all springs and rivers flowed. Priests would perform rituals at its summit to commune with the gods and ensure the continued flow of these vital waters. The control and management of water through canals and irrigation became a religious duty, a way of cooperating with the divine will to sustain their urban world. Beyond the immediate necessities of farming and drinking, rivers served another crucial sacred function. They were spiritual highways, the concept of pilgrimage, a journey to a sacred site for spiritual purification, is ancient, and rivers provided the perfect routes for these transformative travels. Certain points along a river, like the confluence of two streams or a dramatic bend, were often considered especially potent, charged with unique spiritual energy. In India, the Sangam at Prayagraj, where the Ganges, Yamuna, and the mythical Saraswati rivers meet, is one of the holiest sites in Hinduism, attracting millions of pilgrims. In the Celtic world, sources and confluences were sacred to the goddess Sulis, and offerings were frequently deposited in these waters. Settlements naturally grew around these nodal points to serve the constant flow of pilgrims, providing food, shelter, and markets. A town at a sacred river bend wasn't just a convenient stopping point, it was a gateway to the divine, its entire economy and identity shaped by its role in facilitating spiritual journeys. This deep-seated reverence fundamentally embedded sacred geography into the DNA of urban life. Choosing a site for a city was never a purely strategic decision about defense or trade routes, though those were factors. It was first and foremost a spiritual decision. A river provided a clean, defensible boundary, but it also marked a sacred threshold. Founding a city was an act of cosmic ordering, of replicating the divine realm on earth, and the river was the central artery around which that new creation was organized. This belief ensured the long-term survival and stability of these settlements. It fostered a communal identity rooted in a shared, sacred landscape and instilled a powerful ethic of stewardship. You don't poison the water of a god. You don't carelessly exploit the body of a deity. This sacred contract between a people and their river, this view of geography as animate and divine, laid the foundational stones for the world's first great civilizations, creating a legacy of urban centers that still thrive on those very same banks today. While rivers flowed with the spirit of life, mountains reached for the heavens, serving as the ultimate sacred pillars connecting the earthly realm to the divine. Their imposing presence, often shrouded in cloud and mystery, made them natural candidates for the thrones of gods and the homes of powerful spirits. Unlike the fertile valleys that nurtured life, mountains represented something more eternal and unchanging: stability, permanence, and a direct line to the celestial powers that governed the universe. This perception transformed them from mere geological features into central anchors of sacred geography, drawing people toward their slopes not out of convenience, but out of a deep, spiritual yearning to be closer to the source of all creation. In the vast and rugged Andes, the Inca Empire provides one of the most profound examples of mountain worship. They did not see the soaring peaks around them as inanimate rock and ice. They were Apu's powerful mountain spirits that held sway over the weather, water, and the well-being of the people. A peak like Osengate, one of the highest in Peru, was not just a landmark but a living deity. This belief directly dictated human movement and engineering on a massive scale. The incredible Inca road system, a network of trails spanning thousands of miles, often wound its way through high mountain passes not because it was the easiest route, but to pay homage to these Apus. Travelers would leave offerings of coca leaves or shells at specific points along the trail to appease the spirit of the mountain and ensure safe passage. Furthermore, the famous agricultural terraces that sculpt the mountainsides were more than just a practical solution for farming. They were a form of reverence. By carving these elegant steps into the sacred slopes, the Inca were both honoring the Apu and participating in its divine power, ensuring the mountain would provide sustenance in return. The settlement of entire communities at these breathtaking altitudes was a testament to their devotion, a conscious choice to live in the literal shadow of the divine. This sacred relationship with mountains is a universal thread, appearing with distinct cultural flavors across the globe. In Japan, the perfectly symmetrical cone of Mount Fuji became an iconic symbol of sacred beauty and a focal point for spiritual practice. Revered in the Shinto religion as a dwelling place of gods and a gateway to another world, Fuji-san inspired the development of specific pilgrimage routes. Devotees would, and still do, undertake the arduous climb not as a recreational hike, but as a form of ascetic spiritual journey, with stations along the way for prayer and purification. The villages that sprang up at the mountain's base, like Fujinomiya, exist primarily to serve these pilgrims, their entire economies and identities intertwined with the sacred presence of the volcano. Similarly, in ancient Greece, Mount Parnassus was not chosen for its defensive potential, but for its mythic status as the home of Apollo and the Muses. This association made it the perfect site for the Oracle of Delphi, believed to be the very center of the world. The mysterious vapors rising from a fissure in the mountain were seen as the breath of the earth itself, a divine conduit that allowed the Pythia to communicate with Apollo. For centuries, this sacred geographic feature drew a constant stream of travelers, from common farmers to powerful kings, all journeying to the mountain to seek guidance, effectively making Delphi a bustling settlement and a crossroads of the ancient world driven entirely by its spiritual significance. The choice to settle in or near these powerful landscapes was rarely just about defense or resources. It was a deliberate spiritual strategy. living in the presence of a sacred mountain was believed to bring a community under the direct protection and influence of a deity. It was a way to tap into the mountain's perceived stability and power, ensuring cosmic balance and favor for their endeavors. The thin air and challenging conditions were not drawbacks but rather necessary elements of purification and sacrifice, separating the mundane world below from the sacred realm above. In this way, mountains acted as the ultimate portals, places where the veil between worlds was believed to be thinnest. Human presence there, through settlement, pilgrimage, or ritual, was a practice of maintaining harmony between humanity, nature, and the gods, a continuous effort to align their earthly existence with the eternal order of the cosmos. While mountains reached for the heavens and rivers flowed with divine life, the deep, shadowed forests of the ancient world held a different kind of sacred power. These were not places to be cleared and conquered, but to be entered with reverence, for they were seen as the pristine, untamed domains of nature spirits, ancestral beings, and powerful deities. Unlike the open, celestial order of a temple complex, the forest represented a more mysterious, chaotic, and potent form of the sacred, a living, breathing cathedral where every leaf, stone, and stream could be imbued with spirit. This profound belief led cultures across the globe to designate specific forests and groves as inviolable sanctuaries, creating a sacred geography that served as both a spiritual refuge and a practical mechanism for environmental conservation, directly dictating where people felt they could and could not settle. In the misty landscapes of Celtic Europe, the Druids conducted their most sacred rituals not in grand stone temples, but within secluded groves of ancient oak trees. These spaces, known as nemetons, were believed to be thin places where the veil between the human world and the other world was at its most permeable. The oak itself was revered as a symbol of strength, endurance, and wisdom, and its presence marked a grove as a conduit for divine communication. This spiritual significance had a direct and tangible impact on human settlement. Villages, hill forts, and tribal boundaries were often established in close proximity to these sacred groves, close enough to benefit from their perceived protection and spiritual energy, but never within them. The grove itself was a boundary, a line that human habitation was not permitted to cross. This practice created a unique settlement pattern where communities clustered around these green sanctuaries, their very layout acknowledging and respecting the untamed divine power at their center. The forest was not an obstacle to expansion. It was a sacred landlord, and humanity was its tenant. This concept of the sacred grove as a protected ecological and spiritual reserve finds a powerful parallel in the traditions of India, where thousands of Divarakadas, or forests of the gods, still exist today. These patches of pristine wilderness, ranging from a few trees to hundreds of acres, are dedicated to a local deity or ancestral spirit. Entering a Divarakadu requires permission, and activities like cutting trees, hunting, or even collecting dead wood are strictly forbidden by ancient custom. The impact on settlement patterns is unmistakable. You can see it from the air. A thriving, dense village will suddenly give way to a thick, untouched canopy of native trees, a dark green island in a sea of human activity. Agricultural expansion and development historically curved around these groves, their boundaries respected for centuries. This wasn't a result of modern environmental policy, but of deep-seated sacred geography. The grove was the abode of the village's protective deity. To harm it was to invite drought, disease, or famine. This belief system effectively created a decentralized network of biodiversity sanctuaries long before the term was invented, guiding human expansion in a way that preserved crucial ecosystems. Beyond their role as static reserves, these forest sanctuaries also guided movement and pilgrimage. specific groves, often associated with healing springs or unusual rock formations, became destinations for those seeking cures, visions, or favor from the gods. In ancient Greece, the sanctuary of Dodona, dedicated to Zeus, was centered around a sacred oak grove where priests interpreted the rustling of the leaves as divine prophecies, drawing travelers from across the Mediterranean. In Japan, the path to the great Shinto shrine of Ise-Jingu leads through a sacred forest, and the act of walking through this purified space is an integral part of the pilgrim's purification process before approaching the inner sanctum. These journeys, choreographed by sacred geography, created informal pathways and supported small settlements that catered to the travelers, weaving a pattern of human movement that was dictated by spiritual quests into the heart of the woods. Ultimately, the veneration of sacred groves represents one of humanity's most sustainable applications of sacred geography. By viewing the forest not as a resource to be exploited, but as a divine entity to be respected, ancient cultures instinctively practiced a form of conservation ethics. These boundaries, set by divine will, prevented the unchecked sprawl of settlements and the clear cutting of forests, ensuring that pockets of wilderness thrived. This relationship was symbiotic. The groves provided spiritual meaning, ecological services like clean water and stable soil, and a tangible connection to the ancestral past, while human communities provided protection and reverence. It was a system where faith created fences far more powerful than any wall, a testament to the idea that the most effective way to protect a place was to first declare it sacred. If mountains connected humanity to the heavens and forests served as portals to the spirit world, then caves represented the most profound and universal threshold of all, the entrance to the underworld itself. Across continents and cultures, these dark, mysterious openings in the earth were not seen as voids to be avoided, but as sacred wombs, tombs, and gateways to the divine. They were places where the normal rules of the world above did not apply, where one could commune with ancestors, gods, and the raw, chthonic powers of creation and destruction. This powerful belief made caves some of the most potent focal points in all of sacred geography, drawing people toward them with a magnetic force that directly shaped where they chose to live, worship, and build their communities. The ancient Maya of Mesoamerica provide a stunning illustration of this principle. Their entire cosmology was built upon a layered universe with the heavens above, the human world in the middle, and a watery, dark underworld known as Xibalba below. Caves, known as Chichen in Mayan, were not just symbolic of this underworld, they were its literal, physical entrances. A perfect example is the cave of Balancanch, located near the great city of Chichen Itza. This sprawling subterranean labyrinth was believed to be the home of the rain god Chok. Inside, archaeologists have found countless offerings, ceramic pots, jade beads, and ritual artifacts, all carefully placed to petition the god for life-giving rain. This wasn't a secret, hidden practice. It was central to the survival of the civilization. The very location of a major city like Chichen Itza was not an accident. It was strategically placed within easy reach of this and other sacred caves. The city's rulers and priests would regularly descend into these damp, dark chambers to perform ceremonies that ensured the fertility of the land and the favor of the gods. The prosperity of the city above was utterly dependent on the rituals conducted in the darkness below, tethering the urban center to its sacred, subterranean heart. This pattern of settlement emerging from the mouth of a sacred cave is echoed vividly on the other side of the world, in the Mediterranean. On the island of Crete, the Idaean cave, high on the slopes of Mount Ida, was revered as one of the most sacred sites in the ancient Greek world. According to myth, this was the very cave where the goddess Re hid the infant Zeus to protect him from his father, Cronus, who devoured his children. It was here, in this rocky womb, that Zeus was raised in secret by nymphs, his cries masked by the clashing of shields by the mythical Curetes. This wasn't just a story, it was a foundational national myth for the Minoan and later Greek cultures. The cave became a major center of pilgrimage and initiation, particularly for those devoted to the mysterious cult of Zeus. For centuries, people traveled from across the region to visit this site, to leave offerings, and to perhaps undergo rituals that connected them to the origin story of the king of the gods. This constant flow of pilgrims necessitated support inns, markets, guides, which in turn led to the establishment and growth of permanent settlements in the surrounding valleys and along the routes leading to the mountain. The cave didn't just attract visitors, it seeded an entire human ecosystem around its mythic entrance. Far from being places of fear, these subterranean spaces were actively sought out for their transformative power. Caves were the ultimate liminal zones, places of transition between worlds, and thus ideal for rituals of passage. In ancient Greece, the Corinthian cave on Mount Parnassus near Delphi was used by the Maenads, female followers of Dionysus, for their ecstatic rites. In Rome, the Lupercal cave at the foot of the Palatine Hill was where the founders of the city, Romulus and Remus, were said to have been suckled by the she-wolf, and it remained a site of important annual festivals. Initiation rites, where adolescents transitioned into adulthood, often took place in caves, as the darkness and isolation mirrored the psychological journey of death and rebirth. Oracles like the famous Sibyl at Cumae in Italy uttered their prophecies from within caves, their voices seen as emerging directly from the earth's wisdom. These activities created a rhythmic pulse to life in the surrounding areas. Seasonal gatherings, annual festivals, and cycles of pilgrimage dictated by celestial events meant that settlements near these caves lived by a sacred calendar. Their economies, their social structures, and their very identities were synchronized to the comings and goings of those seeking transformation in the darkness, making the human world above a reflection of the divine cycles believed to unfold in the world below. But how exactly did ancient peoples determine which specific patch of earth was blessed and which was not? They didn't leave it to chance or personal preference. This critical decision was often placed in the hands of specialized experts, diviners, priests, and geomancers, who acted as the intermediaries between the human community and the divine will of the landscape itself. These individuals were the master readers of sacred geography, trained to decipher the subtle signs and symbols that the earth presented, transforming the daunting task of choosing a home site from a gamble into a sacred science. Their practices, which might seem esoteric to us today, were a sophisticated blend of keen environmental observation and deep spiritual belief, all aimed at ensuring the long-term success and harmony of a new settlement. In China, this art of reading the land evolved into the highly complex and enduring system known as Feng Shui, which literally translates to wind and water. Feng Shui masters were not mere fortune-tellers, they were highly respected consultants, akin to modern-day urban planners and environmental engineers, but with a spiritual mandate. Their primary goal was to locate and harness the flow of Kai, the vital life force that animates all things, both living and inanimate. They believed this energy moved through the landscape in specific patterns, much like underground water or wind currents. The most auspicious pathways for this energy were called dragon veins, powerful telluric currents that often corresponded with mountain ranges. A master geomancer's job was to find a location known as a zoo or cave, where this dragon vein energy pooled and gathered, creating a spot of immense potential and prosperity. The ideal site for a city or a home was protected at the back by a winding, black tortoise mountain range, embraced on the sides by lower, azure dragon, and white tiger hills and open in the front to a vermilion bird plain with a meandering river or stream. This configuration sheltered the site from harsh winds, provided access to water, and was believed to allow the benevolent Kai to settle and accumulate, while the negative Sha Kai was deflected. The very layout of ancient Beijing is a testament to this practice, with its carefully oriented forbidden city positioned according to these principles to ensure the stability and longevity of the imperial dynasty. On the other side of the ancient world, a strikingly similar practice was unfolding, though with a very different methodology. In ancient Rome, the founding of a new colony was a matter of state importance, and no step was taken without first seeking the approval of the gods. This crucial task fell to a college of priests known as augurs. The ritual they performed was called taking the auspices, and it involved the careful observation of bird flights and bird songs. The augur would define a sacred templum, a rectangular piece of sky, and then patiently watch for signs. The type of bird, its direction of flight, its altitude, and its calls were all interpreted as divine messages. A flight from right to left might be favorable, while left to right could be a dire warning. This was not seen as superstition, but as a direct line of communication with Jupiter himself. Before Romulus and Remus famously fought over the founding of Rome, the legend states that they each took the auspices on different hills to see who would win the gods' favor. The historical record shows that this practice was rigorously applied for centuries. When Scipio Africanus was preparing to besiege the city of Carthage during the Punic Wars, he first had to ensure his camp was on auspicious ground, a process that could delay military operations for days. By anchoring the location of a new town to a positive omen, the augurs provided an unshakable foundation of divine legitimacy. It gave the settlers, who were often leaving behind their homes for an uncertain future, a profound sense of confidence and shared destiny. They weren't just building on any piece of land, they were building on a site chosen by the gods. This divinatory approach to site selection served multiple profound purposes that went far beyond simple spirituality. On a practical level, the principles of geomancy often inadvertently steered communities away from geologically unstable or environmentally hazardous locations. A feng shui master's aversion to sites with poison arrows, sharp, straight landforms or structures pointing at a location could easily describe a place prone to landslides or harsh wind tunnels. The preference for meandering water sources over fast, straight rivers avoided areas susceptible to flash flooding. On a social level, the shared participation in a divination ritual, whether it was watching an augur or following a geomancer's staff, created a powerful collective experience for the founding community. It forged a unifying mythos around their new home from the very first day. Everyone had witnessed the signs or trusted the expert who had. This shared belief in the sacred rightness of their location fostered incredible social cohesion, a sense of shared identity, and a collective responsibility for the community's success. The land itself became a character in their story, a silent partner in their endeavor, its sacredness a bond that held them together through the inevitable challenges of building a new life. Yet the most profound impact of these sacred highways was not just in the temporary structures they supported, but in the permanent communities they seeded and sustained. A pilgrim stopping for a night might need a meal and a bed, but a constant river of such travelers created a reliable economic engine that could support entire towns. This is vividly illustrated by the growth of settlements along the route to the great Mesoamerican city of Teotihuacan. The Avenue of the Dead, the city's central thoroughfare leading to the massive Pyramid of the Sun, was not an empty ceremonial space. Archaeological evidence shows it was lined with permanent residential compounds, workshops, and market stalls. These weren't just for the city's inhabitants. They catered to the thousands of pilgrims who journeyed from across the region to witness the spectacular rituals performed atop the pyramids, particularly during solar zenith passages and equinoxes. The need to feed, house, and supply these visitors created specialized jobs, from potters making ceremonial vessels to farmers growing surplus corn and traders supplying exotic goods like obsidian and feathers. Over generations, what began as a simple path to a holy place evolved into a dense, thriving urban center, its very economy and social structure built upon the bedrock of sacred travel. The pilgrimage route didn't just lead to the city, it was the reason the city existed in its current form, a perfect fusion of devotion and commerce permanently etched into the landscape. This pattern of pilgrimage birthing permanence reaches its most spectacular expression in India with the Kumbh Mela, a festival so immense it temporarily becomes one of the largest cities on Earth. While the festival itself is a temporary gathering, its location is fixed by sacred geography at the Sangam, the confluence of the Ganges, Yamuna, and mythical Saraswati rivers in Prayagraj. This specific point in the landscape is believed to be uniquely charged with spiritual power, making it the ultimate destination for Hindu pilgrims. The economic activity generated by this event, which draws tens of millions of people, is astronomical. But the key to its long-term impact lies in the infrastructure and settlements that grew to support it. The city of Prayagraj itself is a permanent monument to the pilgrimage, its economy, culture, and identity forever shaped by its role as a host. Furthermore, the networks of traders, priests, and service providers who work the Kumbh Mela follow a seasonal circuit of other, smaller pilgrimages throughout the year, creating a stable, year-round economy built entirely around sacred travel. Entire communities and caste groups have historically defined their livelihoods around serving these mobile devotees, proving that a journey of the spirit could also provide a very tangible daily bread. Even in Europe, where ancient pilgrimage routes were often overlaid with later Christian traditions, the underlying economic and settlement patterns hold true. The Camino de Santiago, while reaching its peak in the medieval period, follows a much older tradition of journeying to the end of the world, the rugged Finisterre coast of Spain. Towns like Burgos, Leon, and Ponferrada did not simply happen to be on the way. Their growth, wealth, and architectural splendor are direct results of the Camino. The need for bridges to cross rivers led to the founding of towns like Puente la Reina. The requirement for safe lodging spurred the construction of monasteries, hospitals, and entire districts dedicated to catering to pilgrims. The route became a conduit not just for people, but for ideas, art, architecture, and wealth, stitching together a diverse tapestry of cultures across Europe with a common thread of devotion. A pilgrim's road was far more than a line on a map. It was a dynamic, living artery that pumped economic vitality and cultural exchange across continents, ensuring that the call of a distant sacred site could build a bustling inn, a thriving market, and eventually a lasting city right where one was needed most. And just as pilgrimage routes directed the flow of people, the temples they journeyed towards stood as the ultimate anchors of civilization, the beating hearts around which entire societies coalesced. These were not merely buildings for worship, they were the very engines of urban life, the central processors of a community's spiritual, economic, and social energy. Their location was never arbitrary, placed with meticulous care according to the principles of sacred geography. A temple's foundation stone was, in effect, the first stone of a future city, a divine mandate that would dictate human activity for centuries to come. The temple complex was a microcosm of the universe, and the city that grew around it was an extension of that ordered, sacred world, its streets and districts radiating out from this holy epicenter like spokes on a wheel. The sprawling Karnak temple complex in Egypt offers a breathtaking example of this principle in action. Dedicated primarily to the king of the gods, Amun-Ra, Karnak was far more than a collection of pylons and obelisks. It was believed to be the literal home of the god on earth, a place where the divine and mortal realms intersected. This belief made it the most significant religious site in all of Egypt for over 2,000 years. But its influence was profoundly terrestrial. The need to supply the temple's constant rituals created an immense economic demand. Vast estates owned by the temple produced grain, cattle, and linen. A permanent army of priests, scribes, artisans, guards, and cleaners was required to maintain its operations. This workforce needed housing, food, and goods, which spurred the growth of a massive supporting town right at its gates. Furthermore, during major festivals like the beautiful Opet festival, the statue of Amun-Ra would be carried in a ceremonial bark from Karnak to the temple at Luxor. This procession moved along a grand, sphinx-lined avenue that acted as a sacred corridor, physically and symbolically connecting the two religious centers and defining the urban space between them. The entire city of Thebes, one of the most magnificent of the ancient world, essentially existed to serve Karnak. People settled in the Nile Valley not just for the river's fertility, but to be near this powerhouse of divine activity, seeking both spiritual fulfillment and economic opportunity in its enduring shadow. A similar dynamic unfolded in Mesopotamia, though the architectural expression was dramatically different. There, the towering ziggurat was the central anchor of the city. Unlike the enclosed temples of Egypt, a ziggurat was a massive stepped platform, a man-made sacred mountain reaching toward the heavens. The one at Ur, built by King Ur-Nammu, was a breathtaking sight, its core of mud brick encased in fired brick, with 3 colossal staircases converging at a summit temple. This was not a public place of worship but the exclusive dwelling of the city's patron deity, a physical bridge, a dur, an kai or bond between heaven and earth, where the god could descend to commune with the priesthood. The ziggurat's elevated position was not just symbolic, it literally and figuratively dominated the landscape. All urban planning radiated from this point. The residential districts, the intricate network of canals for irrigation, the defensive walls, all were oriented around this sacred axis. The temple complex surrounding the ziggurat's base managed vast swaths of agricultural land, storing surplus grain in enormous warehouses that could feed the city during sieges or droughts. It functioned as the central bank, the administrative headquarters, and the primary employer. To live in the city of Ur was to live under the gaze of the moon god Nana, to have your daily life and livelihood intrinsically tied to the rhythms and demands of his earthly home. The ziggurat's shadow was a constant reminder that the city's prosperity was a direct result of its divine tenant's favor. This role of the temple as a civilizational catalyst extended far beyond economics and urban planning. It was the fundamental organizer of human knowledge and time. Temple scribes were not just recording religious texts, they were the accountants, historians, and scientists of their day. They developed writing systems to keep track of temple inventories, which evolved into literature and law. They observed the stars from temple rooftops to create accurate calendars for scheduling festivals and planting seasons, leading to advances in astronomy. The temple was the repository of a culture's most valuable information, the original university and library combined. This concentration of knowledge, wealth, and divine authority made the temple the ultimate attractor. It offered protection not just spiritually but physically within the walls that often surrounded the sacred precinct. It offered order in a seemingly chaotic world, providing a predictable calendar of rituals that gave meaning to the passing seasons. It offered community, a shared identity centered around a common patron deity and a collective purpose. A settlement might begin for practical reasons, a defensible hill, a reliable water source, but it would only blossom into a true civilization once it planted the seed of a temple at its core, transforming a random gathering of people into a divinely ordained community with a shared destiny woven into the very fabric of the landscape. This fascinating field of astro-archaeology allows us to literally see through the eyes of our ancestors, deciphering a language written not in words but in stone and sunlight. It reveals that for ancient cultures, the sky was not a distant, abstract canvas but an intimate, interactive clock and compass, its movements directly dictating the placement of their most sacred structures and, by extension, their homes. The Great Passage Tomb of Newgrange in Ireland is a perfect testament to this celestial connection. Built over 5,000 years ago, this massive, circular mound is precisely engineered with a roof box, a small, strategically placed opening above the entrance. For just a few precious minutes at dawn on the winter solstice, the shortest and darkest day of the year, a narrow beam of sunlight pierces through this opening. It travels down the long, dark passageway, eventually illuminating the inner chamber in a dramatic burst of golden light. This was no happy accident. This was a meticulously calculated event, a moment of supreme symbolic power. For an agricultural society, the winter solstice represented the pivotal turning point, the symbolic death of the old sun and its promised rebirth, guaranteeing that the seasons would turn and life would return to the land. By building a structure that captured this celestial moment, the community was physically anchoring this promise of renewal into the very earth. It suggests that the settlement patterns around the Boyne Valley were influenced by this sacred event. People likely gathered here annually, not just to witness a light show, but to participate in a profound ritual that reaffirmed the cosmic order, and it is easy to imagine temporary seasonal settlements or even permanent communities growing to support the guardians and celebrants of this sacred site. On the other side of the world, in the arid plains of southern Peru, the Nazca lines present a different but equally compelling astro-archaeological puzzle. These enormous geoglyphs, massive lines and figures etched into the desert floor, are so large they can only be fully appreciated from the air. For decades, their purpose has been debated, but one compelling theory suggests they functioned as a vast astronomical calendar and ritual pathway. Researchers have found that many of the long, straight lines align with the rising and setting points of the sun, moon, and significant stars during key times of the year, such as the solstices. Other lines point directly to sources of precious water in the foothills. This transforms our understanding of the landscape from a barren canvas into a dynamic sacred map. The act of walking these lines during specific celestial events could have been a form of participatory ritual, a way for the Nazca people to walk alongside the gods and heavenly bodies they revered. This practice would have dictated where and when people gathered in this harsh environment. While the desert itself couldn't support large, permanent cities, the alignments likely directed movement towards ceremonial centers and oases during these astronomically significant periods. The settlements that did exist, often located in nearby river valleys, were inextricably linked to this vast, open-air temple, their ceremonial life and very survival tied to the knowledge encoded in the stars and mirrored on the ground. What astro-archaeology ultimately uncovers is a universal and sophisticated understanding of cyclical time. Ancient peoples from Britain to Peru shared a common goal: to synchronize their earthly existence with the reliable, eternal rhythms of the cosmos. By aligning a temple to a solstice sunrise or a tomb to a specific star, they were creating a permanent, immutable link between the fleeting human world and the perceived permanence of the heavens. This connection provided more than just a calendar for planting crops. It offered existential comfort and a sense of divine order. A village positioned to witness a sacred alignment became more than just a collection of houses. It became a privileged place, a location where the grand cycle of the universe was made visibly manifest. This sacred mandate, written in the language of astronomy, gave communities a powerful reason to remain in a location, to defend it, and to build upon it for generations, ensuring their place in both the physical and the cosmic landscape. While the steady presence of a mountain offered a sense of permanence, the raw, untamed power of a volcanic peak presented an entirely different kind of sacred force, one that was both creative and destructive, demanding a far more complex relationship. These were not just the homes of gods, they were the visible, breathing proof of the gods' immense power and unpredictable temper. A volcanic mountain was a direct conduit to the primal forces of the earth itself, a place where the land was quite literally alive and capable of both granting life and taking it away in an instant. This duality made them some of the most potent and feared features in the entire ancient world, and the human response to them was a fascinating dance of deep reverence and shrewd, practical caution. The islands of Hawaii offer perhaps the most vivid example of this sacred relationship. Here, the volcano goddess Pele is not a distant mythological figure. She is a living, passionate, and sometimes wrathful presence. The Hailmayumo crater at the summit of Kilauea is revered as her personal home and her sacred heart. Ancient Hawaiians understood that the same lava flows that could obliterate entire forests and villages were also the source of the island's very existence, creating new, fertile land from the sea. This belief created a unique settlement pattern guided by a sophisticated risk-benefit analysis rooted in spiritual understanding. Villages were never built directly in the path of the most active lava flows, a zone known as the Wao Pele, or the realm of Pele, which was strictly off-limits for permanent habitation. Instead, communities were established at a respectful distance, often on older, cooled lava fields that had proven their stability. Yet they remained close enough to maintain a connection. The fertile volcanic soil was ideal for farming, and the settlements thrived on this bounty. More importantly, this proximity allowed for the continuous practice of worship. Hawaiians would journey into the higher elevations to leave offerings of ohelo berries, red-colored cloth, and intricate braids of hair at the crater's edge to appease Pele and seek her favor. The entire social and geographic structure of the island was organized around this sacred, volatile heart, with a system of land division, or ahupua, that often ran from the mountain peaks to the sea, ensuring each community had access to both the upland resources and the coastal fisheries, all while respecting the absolute authority of the fire goddess at the center of it all. This delicate balance between reverence for the sacred and the stark reality of danger is tragically illustrated on the other side of the world by Mount Vesuvius in Italy. To the ancient Romans who settled at its base, the mountain was not initially a thing of terror. Its fertile slopes, enriched by millennia of eruptions, were covered in thriving vineyards and orchards, producing some of the most prized wine in the empire. The city of Pompeii was a prosperous and bustling port town, and Herculaneum an elegant seaside retreat for the Roman elite. The mountain was associated with the power of Jupiter, the king of the gods, and its presence may have even been seen as a protective, fatherly figure. There was little cultural memory of its violent potential. The last major eruption had been centuries before. This comfortable coexistence, however, was built on a catastrophic misreading of the mountain's true nature. The eruption in 79 AD was a horrific lesson in the volatile reality of sacred geography. It demonstrated with terrifying clarity that a site could be spiritually significant and materially prosperous while also being immeasurably dangerous. The very forces that created the paradise, the volcanic soil and geothermal warmth, were the same ones that utterly destroyed it. The ruins of Pompeii, preserved under layers of ash, stand as a permanent monument to this complex relationship, a stark reminder that the divine could be as merciless as it was generous. What these powerful landscapes ultimately taught ancient peoples was a form of spiritual risk management. They developed a nuanced understanding that proximity to power came with both incredible benefits and immense responsibilities. The decision to settle near a volcano was never taken lightly. It involved generations of observation, the guidance of priests and shamans who could interpret signs like steam vents, tremors, and changes in animal behavior, and the development of propitiatory rituals designed to maintain a delicate peace. This wasn't a science of prediction, but a culture of adaptation and respect. It created a sacred geography that was not static but dynamic, one that could change overnight with a rumble from the earth. These communities learned to listen to the mountain, to read its moods, and to understand that their survival depended on honoring its power without ever taking its benevolence for granted. They chose to live in the shadow of the dragon, drawn by the riches of its lair, but always with one eye on the horizon and a profound respect for the fiery breath that could, at any moment, reshape their world. While the awesome power of volcanoes commanded a fearful respect, the gentle, life-giving murmur of a freshwater spring or the miraculous appearance of an oasis in the desert inspired a different kind of reverence, one of intimate gratitude and wonder. In a world where clean, reliable water was the absolute determinant of life itself, these sources were not just utilities, they were nothing short of miracles. Ancient peoples saw in the bubbling up of water from the hidden depths of the earth a direct manifestation of the divine, a deliberate gift from benevolent gods or ancestral spirits. This profound belief transformed every spring, well, and oasis into a sacred site, a place where the practical need for survival merged seamlessly with spiritual devotion, permanently etching patterns of settlement and travel into the map of human history. The connection between water and prophecy is perfectly exemplified at one of the most famous sacred sites in the ancient world, the Oracle of Delphi in Greece. The entire spiritual power of Delphi was believed to stem from a specific point, the Castalian Spring. Before any supplicant could approach the Pythia, the priestess who would deliver the god Apollo's cryptic prophecies, they were required to first ritually wash their hair in the spring's waters. This was not just about physical cleanliness, it was a ceremony of spiritual purification. The waters were thought to possess the ability to cleanse the soul and open the mind to divine inspiration, perhaps even carrying the same vapors that rose from the geological fault beneath the temple and intoxicated the Pythia herself. This belief made the spring the literal and figurative wellspring of Delphi's power. It wasn't a secondary feature, it was the origin point. This sacred significance created a permanent, thriving community around what would otherwise be a simple mountain spring. A whole infrastructure of priests, temple attendants, interpreters, innkeepers, and merchants grew to serve the endless stream of visitors who came to drink from and bathe in these holy waters, hoping for a glimpse into their future. The settlement of Delphi existed because of the spring, its entire economy and purpose flowing from that single, sacred source. In the vast, unforgiving expanse of the desert, the significance of a water source was magnified 1,000-fold. Here, an oasis was not merely a convenience, it was the difference between life and a grueling death. It is no surprise that ancient peoples viewed these lush islands of green in a sea of sand as literal gifts from the gods, divine interventions placed there for their salvation. The Siwa oasis in Egypt, isolated deep in the western desert, is a powerful case study. This remote haven was famed throughout the ancient world as the site of the Oracle of Ammon, a deity equated with the Greek Zeus. The oasis's lush palm groves and natural springs were believed to be the direct blessing of this god. Its reputation was so immense that Alexander the Great undertook a perilous journey across the desert to consult its oracle, seeking divine confirmation of his rule. Because of its sacred status and life-giving water, Siwa became a crucial node in the sprawling network of desert trade routes. Caravans carrying salt, gold, and other goods would deliberately chart their course to pass through Siwa, not just to replenish their water skins, but to gain the blessing of the god for their dangerous journey. This constant flow of pilgrims and merchants necessitated a permanent settlement, a place to rest, repair, and trade. The oasis became a melting pot of cultures and a stable, fortified town. Its existence a testament to the fact that in a harsh environment, the line between the spiritual and the practical completely vanishes. The divine was found in the cup of water that saved your life. This sanctification of water sources had a profoundly practical and lasting impact on the landscape. By declaring a spring or well holy, ancient communities were instinctively protecting their most vital resource from pollution and overuse. Customs and taboos often forbade washing clothes or watering animals directly in the sacred spring, preserving water quality for drinking. The area around the source was frequently designated as a peaceful sanctuary, a neutral ground where conflict was forbidden, ensuring safe access for all. This practice effectively created the world's first water conservation zones. Furthermore, these sites became natural waypoints and social hubs. The village well was rarely just a place to draw water. It was the center of news, gossip, and community interaction. In a very real sense, the well was the heart of the village, and the paths that radiated out from it were the arteries of daily life. The location of the well often determined the layout of the entire community, with houses and streets arranged in concentric circles around this central, sacred point. In this way, the spiritual belief in the divinity of water directly shaped the physical and social geography of human habitation, ensuring that these precious sources were cherished, protected, and celebrated as the mystical anchors of civilization that they truly were. Beyond the obvious power of mountains and the life-giving flow of rivers, the ancient world was filled with a more subtle yet equally powerful sacred geography, one where even the most modest hill, a quiet valley, or a uniquely shaped boulder could hold profound meaning and directly guide human footsteps. These were not the dramatic thrones of gods, but the intimate landmarks of the everyday spirit world, natural features that acted as a kind of spiritual shorthand, instantly communicating stories, warnings, and invitations to those who knew how to read them. This symbolic language of the land transformed the entire terrain into a familiar, storied map, where every turn in the path could reveal a new chapter in an ongoing dialogue between the people and the place they called home. For the Native American tribes of the Great Plains, a solitary mountain like Bear Butte in what is now South Dakota was far more than a geological feature. Known as Moto Paha to the Lakota, it was and remains one of the most sacred sites on the continent, a place where the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds is exceptionally thin. For generations, it has served as a primary destination for vision quests, a rite of passage where individuals seek spiritual guidance and personal revelation through fasting, prayer, and solitude. This profound spiritual function made Bear Butte a powerful magnetic north for tribal movement. Entire bands would plan their seasonal migrations across the vast plains to ensure they passed near this holy mountain at the right time of year for these ceremonies. While not a permanent settlement itself, the area around its base became a recurring campsite, a temporary but vital gathering place for rituals, trade, and social cohesion. The presence of Bear Butte on the horizon acted as a sacred beacon, its distinctive shape a constant reminder of the spiritual center of their world. ensuring that even in a seemingly endless landscape, people always knew where they were in relation to what truly mattered. Their patterns of life were not just following buffalo herds, they were orbiting a spiritual sun. Across the Atlantic, in the rolling green hills of Britain, a different kind of symbolic landform captured the ancient imagination. The Cerne Abbas giant, a massive figure of a naked man wielding a club cut into the chalk hillside of Dorset, is a breathtaking example of a landscape feature designed to communicate a powerful message. While its exact origins are debated, its purpose seems clear. It was a colossal ritual landmark impossible to ignore. For travelers navigating the complex terrain of ancient Britain, such figures served as unmissable signposts. The giant is situated near the edge of a steep slope overlooking a fertile valley. Its imposing presence may have signaled to weary travelers that they were approaching a place of safety, abundance, and perhaps a specific deity's protection. It wasn't just a piece of art, it was a functional part of the sacred and practical geography, guiding people toward settled areas and reliable resources. The valley below, blessed by the gaze of this giant, would have been a highly desirable place to settle, its fertility seen as a divine endorsement. The land itself, through this human-enhanced feature, was actively inviting and directing habitation. This practice of encoding meaning into the terrain was a global phenomenon. In Australia, Aboriginal Dreamtime stories describe how ancestral beings formed the landscape during their travels, leaving behind a network of song lines that connect specific rock formations, waterholes, and mountains. A peculiarly shaped rock wasn't just a rock, it was the petrified body of a creator ancestor, and its location told a precise part of a navigational song. To know the story was to know the route. Similarly, in the American Southwest, the Spider Rock Spire in Canyon de Chelly is a central figure in Navajo cosmology, believed to be the home of Spider Woman, a deity who taught the people the art of weaving. This belief designated the entire canyon as a sacred, protected space, influencing whether Navajo people felt it was appropriate to live, farm, and conduct ceremonies. These natural signposts provided a framework for existence, a way to impose a familiar, spiritual order onto the often chaotic and unpredictable natural world. They answered not only the question of "Where am I?", but the more important questions of "Why am I here?" and "How should I behave in this place?" By reading the symbolic language of hills, valleys, and stones, ancient peoples could navigate both the physical and spiritual wilderness, ensuring their journey through life was always aligned with the deep, enduring stories written into the very bones of the earth. For ancient cultures, the passage of time was not a simple tick of a clock but a sacred dance choreographed by the heavens and the earth itself. They perceived the changing seasons not as a mechanical cycle of weather, but as a divine drama, a series of spiritual events that required their active participation to ensure the world kept turning. This profound connection between sacred time and sacred space meant that their entire way of life, when to plant, when to harvest, when to move camp, and when to gather in celebration, was dictated by a celestial and terrestrial calendar, turning the landscape into a living clock and their rituals into its essential gears. We can see this intricate dance most vividly in the great monuments of the ancient world, where stone was used to capture the fleeting moments of solar and lunar power. While Stonehenge is the most iconic example, this practice was near universal. The Great Passage Tomb of Newgrange in Ireland, older than both Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, is precisely engineered so that a single beam of sunlight pierces its inner chamber only at dawn on the winter solstice, illuminating the darkness for just 17 minutes. This was not an architectural quirk. It was a deliberate, breathtaking feat of engineering designed to herald the symbolic rebirth of the sun. For the farming communities who built it, this event was a moment of supreme anxiety and hope. The deepest dark of winter was a perilous time, and the solstice sunrise was the first promise that the light and warmth would return, that the crops would grow again, and that life would continue. This powerful celestial event likely drew people from across the region to witness the spectacle, creating temporary seasonal settlements around the monument. These were not permanent towns, but cyclical ones, their population ebbing and flowing with the solar year, their very existence tied to the sacred timing marked in stone. This synchronization extended far beyond grand monuments into the very bedrock of agricultural life. The predictable flooding of the Nile was the absolute foundation of Egyptian civilization, but its timing was everything. The river's annual inundation was not just welcomed, it was anxiously anticipated and meticulously prepared for through a series of religious festivals. The coming of the flood was heralded by the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, which appeared just before dawn in mid-July. This celestial event triggered the festival of Wepet Renpet, the opening of the year, a time of renewal and celebration. But it also signaled a very practical and sacredly mandated movement of people. As the floodwaters began to spread across the valley, communities would move from their homes on the low-lying floodplains to temporary settlements on higher ground. This was not a panicked flight but a planned, ritualized migration. During this period, when the fields were underwater and farming was impossible, the state mobilized labor for massive construction projects like the pyramids, and community life focused on maintaining canals and preparing for the next planting season. The retreat to higher ground and the subsequent return to the newly fertilized fields were acts of faith, a physical participation in the cycle of death and rebirth that was orchestrated by the god Hapi and written in the stars. The geography of the Nile Valley itself, with its narrow band of fertile land bordered by desert cliffs, provided the perfect stage for this sacred drama to unfold year after year. This fusion of the cyclical and the spiritual created a deeply sustainable and resilient pattern of life. People were not fighting against the rhythms of nature, but moving in harmony with them, their rituals serving as both a form of worship and a sophisticated system of ecological management. The Druids celebrating the solstice at Stonehenge were not just priests, they were the ancient equivalent of master planners, using their astronomical knowledge to set the calendar for planting and harvesting for the surrounding communities. A festival to honor a river god was also a practical reminder to clear the irrigation canals before the spring melt. This sacred timing provided a powerful, unifying structure for society, creating shared moments of collective effort, gratitude, and hope that bound communities together across generations. The land and the sky were not separate from human life. They were active collaborators in it, their cycles providing the unshakable rhythm to which all of existence moved, a constant, reassuring reminder that even in the deepest darkness, the light would always find a way to return. But just as the cyclical rhythms of sacred time guided the movement of people and the growth of crops, the physical world itself was also marked by lines of a different kind, not of time but of space. These were the borders, the edges, the thresholds that ancient peoples saw not as simple lines on a map, but as powerful, spiritually charged boundaries between different states of being. A riverbank wasn't just the edge of the water, it was the frontier between the known world and the mysterious depths. A mountain pass wasn't just a route through the hills, it was a portal from one realm to another, requiring a shift in both pace and spirit. These borderlands were understood as liminal spaces, zones of transition that were inherently unstable, powerful, and sacred. And the way ancient societies managed these thresholds reveals a deep wisdom about human psychology and the need to bring cosmic order to the chaos of the unknown. Perhaps no ancient culture formalized this concept more powerfully than the Romans with their institution of the Pomerium. This was not a defensive wall or a simple city limit. It was a sacred religious boundary, a strip of land consecrated by priests through a specific ritual tracing the intended circumference of the city. The legend states that Romulus plowed a furrow to mark where Rome's walls would stand, and the Pomerium was the space on the city side of that furrow. This line held immense legal and spiritual significance. Within the Pomerium, the civil law of the city, the ius civile, held sway. The army, represented by any man under arms, was absolutely forbidden to cross inward. Military generals had to lay down their command and their weapons before entering, symbolically transitioning from a ruler of war to a citizen of peace. Important state temples had to be constructed inside this boundary, and burials were strictly prohibited, keeping the realm of the dead separate from the living, breathing heart of the city. The Pomerium wasn't static. It was expanded on rare occasions by a decree of the Senate, always following the same sacred rites. This practice beautifully illustrates how sacred geography could directly shape urban expansion. The city didn't just sprawl outward randomly. It grew in deliberate, ritually sanctioned bursts, each new Pomerium line redefining the sacred center and the profane periphery, ensuring that Rome's physical growth was always aligned with divine approval. This need for ritual purification at a boundary was a near-universal impulse. For many cultures, the act of crossing a significant natural feature required a psychological and spiritual preparation, a conscious acknowledgement that one was leaving one defined space and entering another, potentially dangerous realm. In countless traditions, crossing a river required a small offering, a coin, a spoken prayer, a moment of silence to appease the spirit of the waters and ensure safe passage. In Shinto belief in Japan, passing through a torii gate at the entrance to a sacred forest or shrine marks the transition from the mundane world to the sacred precinct, and it is customary to bow slightly before proceeding. In West African traditions, certain rivers were believed to be inhabited by powerful spirits, and crossing them without performing the proper respectful rituals could invite misfortune. This wasn't mere superstition, it was a sophisticated form of psychological wayfinding. These rituals served as mental switch points, preparing the traveler for the different set of rules, dangers, and opportunities that lay ahead. They forced a moment of pause and respect, effectively asking permission to enter. This directly influenced settlement patterns, as people would naturally feel more secure establishing permanent homes in areas that were clearly defined and sanctified, well within a known and protected spiritual zone, rather than out in the ambiguous, unconsecrated wilds beyond a powerful threshold. Ultimately, these sacred borders functioned as a profound conflict resolution mechanism and a tool for creating social order. By defining a space as spiritually distinct, whether it was the inner sanctum of a temple, the boundaries of a city, or the hunting grounds of a specific tribe, ancient societies were creating clear, divinely sanctioned rules of engagement. A border marked by a river or a standing stone wasn't just a claim of ownership, it was a statement that this land is under the protection of our gods, and to violate it is to violate a divine order. This could prevent misunderstandings and reduce clashes between neighboring groups, as these boundaries were often mutually recognized and respected out of shared spiritual fear, even without a written treaty. Furthermore, within a community, these liminal zones provided a controlled space for dealing with social outliers and transitions. The area just outside the city gates, for instance, was often where execution grounds, brothels, and cemeteries were located, all necessary elements of society that were considered spiritually polluting and thus had to be kept beyond the sacred inner core. In this way, sacred geography didn't just describe the world, it helped to manage it, creating a structured, hierarchical landscape of meaning that told people not only where they were, but what was expected of them there, bringing a sense of divine harmony to the complex and often contentious business of human coexistence. Yet the sacred map was not drawn solely for human eyes. Ancient peoples understood they were not the only actors in this grand drama. They shared the stage with other beings whose lives were also woven into the spiritual fabric of the land. The predictable, majestic migrations of animals were not seen as random wanderings, but as purposeful journeys guided by the same divine forces that directed human destiny. These animal pathways became sacred corridors, invisible highways of spirit and sustenance that dictated where people would travel, when they would settle, and how they would interpret the will of the gods. This created a profound, symbiotic relationship with the natural world, where humanity was not a master of the landscape but a participant in a shared, sacred geography. For the Lakota and other plains tribes of North America, the annual migration of the buffalo was nothing less than a sacred event, a cyclical gift from the Great Spirit. They did not perceive the massive herds as mere prey, but as conscious relatives who had willingly agreed to sacrifice themselves for the people's survival, so long as they were treated with the proper respect. The buffalo's movement was believed to be directed by spiritual beings like the white buffalo calf woman, a sacred messenger who brought the Lakota their most important spiritual practices. Because of this, the Lakota did not simply chase the buffalo, they followed them, interpreting their movement patterns as divine guidance for their own seasonal migrations. Where the buffalo went, the people went. Their entire annual cycle, from the location of their winter camps in protected river valleys to their summer gatherings on the open plains for the great hunts and sun dance ceremonies, was choreographed by the hoofbeats of the buffalo. The geography of their world was defined by these sacred trails, known as buffalo roads, which often followed natural ridges and passes. To settle or camp near these corridors was to position oneself at the heart of both physical sustenance and spiritual significance, living in the flow of a divinely ordained cycle. This reverence for animal-guided pathways echoes across the savannas and forests of Africa, where the movement of great herds was similarly sanctified. For the Maasai people of East Africa, the routes traversed by elephants and wildebeest were not just hunting grounds but blessed spaces. The elephant, or all-tome in the Ma language, is considered a sacred animal, its immense size and intelligence marking it as a vessel of divine power. Its ancient migration routes, passed down through generations of matriarchs, often led to vital mineral licks and water sources. By observing and respecting these paths, the Maasai were able to discover these same life-sustaining resources. Settlements and livestock enclosures were often established along the peripheries of these corridors, close enough to benefit from the knowledge encoded in the animal's movement, but respectful enough to avoid conflict. The annual Great Migration of wildebeest and zebra across the Serengeti was seen as a manifestation of the Earth's enduring rhythm, a sacred pilgrimage that replenished the land. Ritual hunts conducted along these routes were not acts of mere acquisition but ceremonies of participation, acknowledging the shared journey of all living creatures and ensuring the balance between the human and animal worlds remained intact. This intertwining of human and animal movement wove a richer, more complex layer into the sacred landscape. The land was not just a collection of holy mountains and rivers, it was a living network of trails, each with its own story and spiritual tenet. A path worn deep into the earth by generations of caribou might also become a spirit path for shamans seeking vision. A flyway for migratory birds, etching patterns across the sky at precise times of the year, could become a celestial calendar, telling people when to plant or when to hold a festival for the returning sun. These animal corridors created a geography of relationship, a constant reminder that humanity was part of a larger community of beings, all under the gaze of the same creators. To follow the buffalo or honor the elephant's path was to acknowledge a shared right to the land, a mutual belonging that fostered a deep ethic of conservation and respect long before the concept existed in modern terms. The sacred map was therefore a collaborative creation, its lines drawn not only by gods and humans but by the countless other creatures who also called the earth their home. This profound desire to mirror the heavens on earth reached its most ambitious expression in the very design of ancient cities themselves. Urban planning was never simply a matter of practical logistics or defense. It was a sacred act of creation, an attempt to build a perfect, miniature replica of the cosmic order here on the ground. The city was conceived as a microcosm, a small-scale model of the universe, and its layout was a deliberate, physical prayer intended to maintain harmony between the human and divine realms. Every street, every temple, and every district was meticulously placed according to a spiritual blueprint, ensuring that the daily life of its citizens unfolded within a divinely sanctioned framework. In the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, this concept manifested in the awe-inspiring form of the ziggurat, which served as the literal and figurative axis mundi, or world axis, of the city. Babylon provides the most iconic example. At its heart stood the great Etemenanke ziggurat, a massive, tiered pyramid dedicated to the patron god Marduk. This structure was not just a temple, it was believed to be the foundation of heaven and earth, the pivotal point around which the entire cosmos rotated. The city's layout radiated out from this sacred center in concentric circles of influence. Immediately surrounding the ziggurat were the main temples and the palatial district, housing the priests and the king, who acted as the intermediary between the gods and the people. Beyond that lay the residential quarters of the craftsmen, merchants, and other citizens, and finally, the agricultural lands that sustained the urban population, all encircled by protective walls. This wasn't a random sprawl. It was a deliberate hierarchy of sacredness, with the pure, divine power concentrated at the center and gradually diffusing outward. The processional way used during the New Year festival didn't just connect 2 points. It was a ceremonial path that reenacted Marduk's victory over chaos, reinforcing the cosmic order for another year. To walk from the city gates to the ziggurat was to journey from the periphery of the world to its very center, a daily reminder for every citizen of their place within a divinely structured universe. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Indus Valley civilization was achieving a similar harmony through a strikingly different aesthetic. The great city of Mohenjo-Daro, with its remarkably advanced and standardized grid pattern of streets, presents a fascinating puzzle. While its precise cosmological beliefs remain elusive due to the undeciphered script, the sheer order and orientation of the city suggest a deep concern with celestial alignment. The main streets are laid out in a nearly perfect north-south, east-west grid, a feat that requires sophisticated astronomical knowledge to achieve. This alignment likely did more than just facilitate drainage and traffic. It would have positioned the entire city in harmony with the path of the sun, the moon, and the stars. The most dominant structure in the city is not a pyramid but the so-called Great Bath, a large, waterproofed public tank that may have been used for ritual purification ceremonies. This focus on water and cleanliness hints at a cosmology where ritual purity was paramount to maintaining cosmic order. The city's astonishing uniformity in brick size, weights, and measures across a vast territory further suggests a shared worldview that valued balance, standardization, and harmony above all else. The grid itself can be seen as a sacred diagram, imposing a human sense of order onto the landscape, creating a stable, predictable environment that reflected the perceived regularity of the heavens. Living within this precise grid, every citizen would have experienced a sense of place and order, their movements channeled by streets that were quite literally aligned with the cosmos. These urban designs were far more than just architectural vanity. They were essential tools for social cohesion and cultural endurance. By building a city that reflected their understanding of the universe, ancient peoples created a constant, immersive environment that reinforced their worldview every single day. A Babylonian child growing up in the shadow of the ziggurat internalized the concept of a hierarchical, centrally ordered cosmos. A citizen of Mohenjo-Daro walking the perfectly straight, cardinal-oriented streets absorbed a sense of balance and standardized harmony. The city itself was the ultimate teacher, its stones and pathways silently instructing each generation in the sacred principles that held their world together. This sacred urban planning provided an unshakable foundation of identity and meaning, turning a mere collection of buildings into a living, breathing entity that was both a reflection of heaven and a sanctuary for the human spirit. But these sacred sites were rarely isolated wonders standing alone in the wilderness. More often, they were interconnected nodes in a much grander design, part of a vast, integrated system that ancient cultures perceived as a single, living ritual landscape. This was sacred geography operating at its most sophisticated level, where mountains, rivers, stones, and man-made structures all worked in concert, each playing a specific role in a sprawling spiritual symphony that guided human movement and settlement across entire regions. This holistic view transformed the environment from a collection of individual sacred spots into a cohesive, functioning entity, a single ceremonial canvas where every natural feature had a divinely appointed part to play. The Nazca lines of Peru present one of the world's most breathtaking examples of this integrated sacred system. From the ground, these giant geoglyphs are little more than shallow scratches in the desert pavement, but from above, they reveal themselves as immense figures of spiders, monkeys, and hummingbirds, connected by miles of perfectly straight lines that run for miles across the plateau. For a long time, these lines were seen as isolated mysteries, but we now understand they were intimately connected to the surrounding Andean landscape. Many of these long, straight pathways point directly toward specific mountains on the horizon that were revered as sources of water, the most precious resource in this arid environment. During the summer solstice, for instance, the sun sets precisely behind one such peak when viewed from the center of the main Nazca figure, effectively using the mountain as a giant celestial marker. Furthermore, the lines themselves are believed to have functioned as ritual pathways for ceremonial processions, guiding people toward these sacred water sources for prayers and offerings. The entire complex, the lines on the desert floor, the distant Apu mountain spirits, and the hidden water tables below formed a single, interconnected ritual system. This sacred network didn't just dictate where ceremonies were held. It influenced whether Nazca people felt it was appropriate to build their homes and communities, clustering their settlements in the valleys that were blessed by the gaze of these mountain deities and connected to the ceremonial pathways above. A similar principle of integration unfolds across the Salisbury Plain in England, where Stonehenge is merely the most famous piece of a much larger and equally fascinating ritual landscape. The Great Stone Circle itself is just the heart of a vast complex that includes a 3-kilometer-long processional avenue leading to the River Avon, numerous burial mounds known as barrows, and other smaller henge monuments like Woodhenge and Durrington Walls. This was not a random scattering of features. It was a carefully choreographed sacred geography designed for a purpose. The avenue connecting Stonehenge to the river suggests that the final stage of a ritual journey involved a symbolic passage by water, perhaps representing a transition between worlds. The hundreds of burial mounds placed on the surrounding ridges are not randomly located either. They are strategically positioned to be visible from the stone circle and are often aligned with significant solar and lunar events. This created a permanent community of the ancestors literally watching over the rituals of the living from the hillsides. This entire landscape functioned as a colossal astronomical calendar and a theater for the dead, guiding seasonal migrations of people from across Britain. They would have traveled along ancient pathways to gather at specific times of the year, their temporary settlements and ceremonies orchestrated by the alignments between the stones, the avenues, the river, and the tombs of their forebears. The presence of the permanent settlement at Durrington Walls, a huge village just a few kilometers away, was likely directly tied to supporting this cyclical influx of pilgrims, its existence justified by its role in maintaining the sacred harmony of the entire region. What these expansive ritual landscapes ultimately reveal is a worldview of breathtaking sophistication and profound respect. Ancient peoples did not see themselves as separate from nature, building monuments in opposition to the wilderness. Instead, they saw themselves as active participants within a living, breathing, and sentient environment. Their sacred sites were not built upon the land, but with it, incorporating existing natural features as essential components of their spiritual architecture. A mountain wasn't just a backdrop for a temple, it was the temple's most important pillar. A river wasn't just a resource near a sacred spring, it was the processional route that gave the spring its meaning. This holistic approach ensured that human activity was woven into the existing ecological and spiritual tapestry of a place, enhancing its sacredness rather than disrupting it. It was a form of cosmic collaboration, where humanity's role was to complete the sacred patterns they perceived in the natural world, using their monuments to highlight and amplify the divine harmony they believed was already present in the very bones of the earth. Yet this profound spiritual connection to the land also carried a darker, more contentious side, one where devotion could transform into obsession and sacred geography became the ultimate prize in the high-stakes game of ancient conflict and diplomacy. A holy mountain or a venerated river wasn't just a place of worship, it was a source of immense soft power, a strategic asset that could legitimize a ruler, unify a people, or provide a casus belli for invasion. Controlling these sites meant controlling the narrative of divine favor, and this potent blend of faith and realpolitik often drew armies across continents and dictated the fate of entire civilizations, proving that the most fiercely contested borders were often those drawn not by kings but by gods. The ancient city of Jerusalem stands as perhaps the most enduring and tragic example of this principle in action. For over 3 millennia, this single location has been venerated as a sacred center by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, each embedding its most profound narratives into the very stones of the city. For King David, capturing the Jebusite city and establishing it as his capital was a masterstroke of sacred geopolitics. It was a politically neutral site, not previously associated with any of the powerful Israelite tribes, and its association with Mount Moriah, the believed site of Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac, instantly endowed his reign with unparalleled divine legitimacy. Solomon's construction of the first temple on that very spot cemented Jerusalem's status as the undisputed spiritual and political heart of the kingdom. This concentration of sacred power, however, made it an irresistible target. The Babylonian conquest and the destruction of the temple in 586 BCE was not just a military defeat. It was a theological catastrophe, an event so traumatic it forced a complete reimagining of Jewish faith and identity during the exile. Centuries later, the Roman destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE was equally calculated, a deliberate strike by Emperor Titus to shatter the core of Jewish resistance by demolishing its spiritual anchor. The armies that marched on Jerusalem, from the Babylonians to the Romans to the Crusaders, understood that to capture this city was to capture the very soul of a people, making its control worth any cost in blood and treasure. This pattern of sacred sites fueling both unification and conquest repeated itself with striking similarity in the Americas. The Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan was more than a city, it was the beating heart of a cosmic order. Founded on the site where an eagle was seen perched on a cactus with a serpent in its beak, a sign prophesied by the god Huitzilopochtli, its location was a divine mandate. At its center stood the Templo Mayor, a massive double pyramid dedicated to the god of war and the god of rain. This was not merely a place of prayer, it was the engine of the Aztec Empire. The need to supply this temple with offerings, including the most precious offering of all, human life, dictated Aztec foreign policy entirely. Their wars of expansion were not primarily fought for land or material wealth, but for captives and tribute to sustain the sacred rituals that they believed kept the sun rising and the world from ending. This created a terrifyingly pragmatic form of sacred geopolitics. Conquered cities were not required to adopt Aztec culture wholesale, but they were forced to send victims for sacrifice and contribute to the construction and upkeep of the temple complex in Tenochtitlan. Access to the sacred center became the ultimate symbol of political power, and the awe-inspiring sight of the city itself, rising from the lake with its towering temples, was a potent tool of diplomacy and intimidation, designed to convince allies and enemies alike of the Aztecs' divinely ordained right to rule. This strategic use of sacred geography extended far beyond all-out war, deeply influencing the subtler arts of ancient diplomacy and alliance building. A powerful king might demonstrate his piety and wealth by funding the construction of a temple in a subject city, a gesture that was both generous and a clear assertion of his influence over their most sacred space. Marriage alliances between royal houses were often sealed not in a palace but at a holy site, invoking the gods as witnesses to the treaty and making its violation not just a political offense but a sacrilegious one. Neutrality for a sacred site was a common demand in peace treaties, with rival powers agreeing that certain temples or oracle sites would be inviolable, safe havens for pilgrims from all sides. The sanctuary of Delphi in Greece managed to maintain a degree of political neutrality for centuries, its sacred status protecting it from the ravages of the constant wars between Greek city-states, and its oracle was consulted by all sides, making it a crucial, if unofficial, channel of diplomatic communication. The control of a sacred site provided a language of power that transcended local dialects and customs, a universally understood currency of divine legitimacy that could be used to forge an empire, break a rival, or secure a fragile peace, proving that in the ancient world, the most effective map for understanding geopolitics was often a map of faith. Yet this deep interconnection between faith and the physical world offered more than just a framework for conflict. It also provided a powerful blueprint for survival and harmony. The very same beliefs that could draw armies to a holy city could also inspire communities to live in a delicate, sustainable balance with their environment, turning sacred geography into a practical guide for resilience. This wasn't a modern concept of conservation. It was an instinctual, spiritually mandated form of adaptation, where the rules for living well were written not in manuals but in myth, and enforced not by government policy but by divine will. This wisdom allowed ancient societies to thrive in some of the most challenging environments on Earth, creating settlements that were not just strategically located, but spiritually attuned to the subtle rhythms of the natural world. Nowhere is this elegant fusion of ritual and practicality more vividly alive today than on the Indonesian island of Bali, with its centuries-old Subak irrigation system. This isn't merely a network of canals and water gates. It is a breathtakingly complex socio-religious institution governed by the principle of Trihita Karana, the three causes of well-being, which are harmony with God, harmony with other people, and harmony with nature. At the heart of every Subak is a water temple dedicated to Dewi Sri, the goddess of rice. The priests of these temples don't just lead prayers, they are the water managers. Their decisions on when to plant and when to flood the fields are based on a ritual calendar and astronomical observations, ensuring that water is distributed fairly from the uplands down to the coast. A farmer cannot simply take water when he pleases. His access is scheduled according to a sacred cycle that benefits the entire watershed. This system prevents upstream farmers from hoarding water and stops downstream communities from going thirsty, all under the auspices of a divine mandate. The result is a stunning, terraced landscape that produces abundant harvests, supports a remarkably dense population, and has sustained itself for over 1,000 years. The Balinese people settled this rugged volcanic terrain successfully because their sacred beliefs provided a pre-engineered, community-focused system for managing its most vital resource. Their geography is sacred not just in its temples, but in its very waterways, and this spiritual framing has ensured its survival into the modern era. A similar, though starkly different, form of adaptation can be seen in the ancient American Southwest among the ancestral Pueblones, often called the Anasazi. In the arid canyons of places like Mesa Verde, they engineered their famous cliff dwellings not just for defense, but with a profound understanding of solar alignment. These villages were built into south-facing alcoves high up canyon walls. In the winter, when the sun rides low in the sky, its rays would penetrate deep into these recesses, providing natural warmth and light to the inhabitants. In the brutal summer heat, with the sun high overhead, the massive rock overhangs would cast a cooling shade over the dwellings, creating a natural form of air conditioning. This wasn't an accident, it was a deliberate choice based on generations of observing the sun's path. This solar orientation drastically reduced their energy needs for heating and cooling, a critical advantage in a resource-scarce environment. But the alignment likely went beyond mere comfort. Certain structures, like the Sun Temple at Mesa Verde, feature precise astronomical alignments with solstices and equinoxes, suggesting that the changing angles of light also marked important ritual dates, weaving the cyclical passage of time into the very fabric of their daily lives. Their choice of dwelling place was a masterclass in environmental adaptation, one that blended practical necessity with cosmological order, fostering a resilient community deeply in sync with the desert's harsh but predictable rhythms. What these examples from Bali and Colorado reveal is a forgotten layer of ancient wisdom, where spiritual belief was the primary engine of sustainability. Long before the terms ecological balance or resource management were ever coined, these cultures had developed sophisticated systems to achieve precisely those goals, using the language of ritual and myth to encode and enforce them. The threat of divine displeasure or social ostracization for breaking a water-sharing rule was far more powerful than any written law could be. The belief that a particular canyon was a gift from the sun god ensured it was settled in a way that honored that gift. This sacred framework created a long-term perspective that is often missing from modern planning. It encouraged people to think in terms of generations, not just seasons, because their covenant was with the eternal spirits of the land, not with a fleeting political administration. This wasn't a perfect system. Society still faced collapse from climate change or resource depletion, but it provided a resilient buffer, a set of time-tested principles that allowed human settlements to become integrated components of their ecosystems rather than external forces exploiting them. In listening to the sacred stories of the earth, our ancestors found the instructions not just for where to live, but crucially for how to live well upon it. And just as spiritual beliefs could anchor a community to one place, they also had the incredible power to set people in motion, creating dynamic rivers of humanity that flowed across continents. These were not random wanderings, but purposeful journeys along pathways that were themselves considered sacred. The very act of travel was transformed into a pilgrimage, and the routes they followed became far more than simple trails. They evolved into vibrant corridors of civilization, where the exchange of goods was seamlessly woven together with the exchange of ideas, gods, and entire ways of life. This fusion of devotion and commerce turned these pathways into the world's first information superhighways, ensuring that settlements didn't just arise at strategic points for defense or resources, but at the blessed crossroads where spiritual seeking met economic opportunity. Perhaps no route in history exemplifies this better than the legendary Silk Road. While we often picture it as a single dusty trail for camel caravans laden with silk and spices, it was in reality a sprawling network of routes connecting the East and West. And critically, its path was not charted by merchants alone. It was guided by the sacred geography of the lands it traversed. A prime example is the oasis town of Dunhuang, located at a crucial junction where the northern and southern routes of the Silk Road converged, right at the edge of the fearsome Taklamakan Desert. But Dunhuang was more than just a place to restock water and supplies. It was home to the Mogao Caves, a vast complex of hundreds of Buddhist cave temples carved into a cliff face. For weary travelers who had just survived the treacherous desert, these caves were a spiritual oasis, a place to give thanks for their survival and to pray for protection on the next leg of their journey. Pilgrims, monks, and merchants from India, Central Asia, China, and beyond would stop here, not only to worship but to rest and trade. They left behind more than just footprints. They funded the creation of stunning wall paintings and sculptures within the caves, creating a unique artistic melting pot where Indian bodhisattvas blended with Chinese aesthetics and Persian motifs. This constant influx of diverse people and ideas, all drawn to this sacred site, transformed Dunhuang from a simple rest stop into a permanent and incredibly cosmopolitan center of learning, art, and commerce. The sacred site created the economic hub, and the trade route supplied it with an endless stream of cultural influences, each leaving a lasting mark on the other. This same pattern of sacred pathways fostering cultural exchange emerged completely independently in the pre-Columbian Americas. Long before European contact, a vast network of trails crisscrossed the continent, and many of these were pilgrimage routes connecting major ceremonial centers. The great city of Cahokia, located near modern-day St. Louis, was the largest urban settlement north of Mexico in its day, a thriving metropolis centered around enormous earthen mounds. One of the most important, Monk's Mound, dominated the landscape and was likely the stage for elaborate rituals that drew people from across the Mississippi River Valley and beyond. The routes leading to Cahokia were well-traveled highways of interaction. Pilgrims coming to witness the ceremonies would bring with them distinctive pottery, rare materials like copper from the Great Lakes or seashells from the Gulf Coast, and most importantly, their own beliefs and stories. Archaeologists find evidence of these exchanges in the artifacts unearthed at Cahokia, pottery styles from distant regions, ceremonial objects made from exotic materials. This constant flow of people and ideas along these sacred corridors helped to spread not just goods, but religious practices, architectural styles, and agricultural techniques. A new way of worshipping or building a home that began in Cahokia could, within a few generations, find its way hundreds of miles away, carried by people who walked the sacred paths to and from the great city. The route itself, sanctified by its destination, became a conduit for cultural diffusion, weaving together a tapestry of connected communities across a vast landscape. What made these routes so powerful was their dual nature. They were simultaneously physical trails across the earth and spiritual journeys towards enlightenment or divine favor. A merchant traveling the Silk Road was also a pilgrim seeking blessings at Dunhuang. A farmer walking to Cahokia was both a spectator to a ceremony and a participant in a vast network of exchange. This sanctification of movement meant that the journey itself held value, not just the destination. This encouraged the development of infrastructure to support these travelers, not just caravanserais and inns, but also temples, shrines, and markers along the way. Settlements that grew up to provide these services found their own identities shaped by this role, becoming places of rest, reflection, and cultural mingling. The constant passage of diverse groups fostered a remarkable degree of tolerance and syncretism, as different beliefs and customs met and melded on neutral, sacred ground. These pathways ensured that no great center of civilization developed in isolation. They were all, in some way, products of the endless flow of people and ideas that moved along the rivers of faith, forever enriching the human story through the sacred geography that connected them all. Yet this intricate and ancient dance between spirit and soil, which had guided human footsteps for millennia, could not withstand the seismic shifts of the modern era. A new worldview was dawning, one that saw the land not as a living, sacred partner, but as a resource to be measured, commodified, and optimized. The rise of industrialization and the spread of secular, scientific thought introduced a radically different set of priorities for where and how people should live. The invisible lines of divine energy that once connected mountain shrines to river temples were slowly erased, replaced by the stark, practical lines of property deeds, railway tracks, and factory smokestacks. The compass of human movement, once aligned by the stars and stories of gods, now pointed unwaveringly toward economic opportunity and industrial efficiency. This profound transformation is starkly illustrated by the enclosure movements that swept across Europe, particularly in Britain, starting around the 17th century. For centuries, the rural landscape had been a patchwork of open fields, common lands, and shared pastures, its layout still echoing older, communal patterns that often respected ancient groves, burial mounds, and ritual pathways. The land was woven into the community's identity, but enclosure acts passed by Parliament allowed wealthy landowners to fence off these common areas, consolidating small strips into large, privately owned fields dedicated to more profitable, efficient agriculture. This was a revolution in land use, and it was utterly deaf to sacred geography. A standing stone that had marked a solstice sunrise for generations became an inconvenient obstacle to be cleared. A sacred grove that had been protected for centuries by local custom was now just a cluster of trees blocking a plow's path. The spiritual connection to the land was severed by the surveyor's chain and the property line. This process didn't just change the landscape, it shattered communities. People who had lived in symbiotic relationship with the land for generations were dispossessed, forced off their ancestral homes and into the growing industrial cities to seek wage labor. The sacred geography that had once organized their world and given it meaning was dismantled, acre by acre, in the name of progress and profit. This great migration from the countryside to the city became the defining pattern of the modern age, and it was driven by a force far more powerful than any spiritual pull, the promise of work. The booming factories of the Industrial Revolution demanded a massive, concentrated workforce, drawing people into urban centers with an irresistible magnetic force. Cities like Manchester, London, and Pittsburgh exploded in size, their layouts dictated not by celestial alignments or the presence of a holy spring, but by the brutal logic of industry. Neighborhoods crowded around factories, railways cut through historic districts, and canals were dug for transport, with little regard for what might have been there before. An ancient burial ground might be paved over for a new road. A venerated river, once seen as a goddess, could be channelized into a concrete culvert to serve as an industrial sewer. The very pace of this change left no room for the old, slow ways of understanding the land. In this new urban reality, a river's value was measured in its ability to power mills and carry away waste, not in its spiritual potency. A hill was valuable for the view it offered of a factory manager's estate, not as the throne of a local deity. The sacred map was not just forgotten, it was actively buried under layers of brick, steel, and asphalt. But the old ways did not vanish completely. They persist as haunting echoes in our modern landscape, subtle reminders of a deeper, older world hiding just beneath the surface of our concrete and steel reality. These fragments of sacred geography survive in the very names we give to places. The city of Oxford earns its name from a long-vanished sacred ford where oxen once crossed, perhaps under the watchful eye of a forgotten river spirit. In countless towns across America, you find springs named God's Well or creeks called Prayer Run, their names a fossilized memory of the reverence they once commanded. Even in our most planned urban environments, the past pokes through. A street might curve inexplicably to avoid a centuries-old oak tree that was once the center of a village green. A cathedral, like Notre Dame in Paris, is often built directly atop the ruins of a Roman temple, which itself was likely built on a Celtic sacred site, creating a vertical archaeology of faith in the very heart of the modern city. These are the ghosts of sacred geography, lingering on in our language and our landmarks, inviting us to pause for a moment and consider what was lost when we stopped listening to the stories the land had to tell. Yet the story of sacred geography is far from a relic confined to history books. In our modern, hyper-connected world, a quiet but powerful resurgence is underway, a collective yearning to rediscover the lost language of the land and find our place within its ancient stories once more. This isn't about rejecting progress, but about seeking balance, about weaving threads of timeless wisdom into the fabric of our contemporary lives. People are increasingly looking to these ancient principles not out of mere nostalgia, but as a source of genuine solutions for modern problems, from environmental crises and unsustainable urban sprawl to a deep-seated sense of spiritual disconnection. This movement is breathing new life into forgotten pathways and inspiring a fresh way of seeing the world around us, suggesting that the old maps might still hold the keys to a more harmonious future. One of the most visible signs of this revival is the spectacular rebirth of ancient pilgrimage routes. The Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James in northern Spain, is the perfect example. Nearly lost to history just decades ago, it now welcomes hundreds of thousands of pilgrims from all over the world each year. But these modern walkers are not all devout Catholics seeking absolution. Many are spiritual seekers, adventure tourists, or simply people craving a digital detox and a chance to reflect. Their journey retraces the sacred geography of the medieval world, but its impact is intensely modern and wonderfully tangible. The constant flow of pilgrims has revitalized entire regions of the Spanish countryside that were facing economic decline and depopulation. Small villages that were almost ghost towns now thrive with renovated albergues, pilgrim hostels, family-run cafes, and shops selling supplies. This isn't just tourism. It's a form of sacred economics, where the ancient act of walking a holy path provides a sustainable livelihood for communities along its length, ensuring their survival and drawing new settlers back to rural areas. The Camino demonstrates that a route defined by faith can once again become a powerful artery for human movement and settlement, proving that sacred geography can have a very real, positive impact on local economies and community resilience in the 21st century. This renewed appreciation is also fueling a powerful alliance between spirituality and environmental conservation, drawing direct inspiration from indigenous worldviews that have always seen nature as sacred. Modern environmental movements are increasingly recognizing that to protect a place effectively, people must first learn to love it, and nothing inspires love and respect more than a sense of the sacred. Around the world, conservationists are partnering with indigenous elders to identify and protect sacred natural sites, old-growth forests, pristine mountain peaks, and untouched river sources that are under threat from development or resource extraction. In New Zealand, the legal recognition of the Wanganui River as a living entity, possessing the same legal rights as a person, is a breathtakingly direct application of this ancient principle. This landmark decision, driven by the Maori people's profound belief that the river is an ancestor, is now a pioneering model for ecological protection globally. It shifts the entire framework of conservation from one of resource management to one of relationship, echoing the ancient belief that the land is not a possession but a relative to be cared for. This approach offers a far deeper motivation for sustainability than regulations alone. It taps into a universal human instinct to protect what we hold sacred, suggesting that the future of conservation might depend on our ability to rediscover the sacred geography right in our own backyards. This growing movement is more than a trend. It is a fundamental re-evaluation of our place in the world. In an age of climate change, rampant urbanization, and digital overload, the ancient principles of sacred geography offer a compelling alternative narrative. They invite us to see our cities not as separate from nature but as potential microcosms of it, where green spaces are treated as sacred lungs and urban planning considers the flow of energy and community well-being. They encourage us to design our homes and neighborhoods with an eye toward harmony with the sun and wind, much like the ancient principles of Feng Shui or the solar-oriented cliff dwellings of the ancestral Pueblones. The resurgence of interest in these ideas is a search for roots and meaning, a desire to feel grounded in a world that often feels rootless and transient. It suggests a future where our movement and settlement patterns could be guided not just by GPS coordinates and economic metrics, but by a deeper connection to the genius loci, the spirit of a place. We are beginning to remember that the land has a story to tell, and by listening to those old stories, we might just find the wisdom to write a better, more sustainable, and more soulful chapter for ourselves. From the sacred rivers of India to the celestial alignments of Stonehenge, we've journeyed through how sacred geography controlled ancient movement and settlement, revealing a world where every landscape held divine meaning. These beliefs were far more than simple superstition. They formed the very bedrock of civilization, guiding our ancestors to live in a sustainable balance with the natural world, fostering profound community bonds, and nurturing a lasting sense of awe for the planet we call home. They understood something we are in danger of forgetting, that we are not separate from our environment, but an integral part of a living, breathing world. As we now face unprecedented modern challenges, from the global threat of climate change to the isolating sprawl of urbanization, perhaps there is profound wisdom in revisiting these ancient perspectives. This isn't about abandoning progress or technology, but about finding a crucial balance, a way to weave a thread of reverence back into the fabric of our daily lives, to listen for the old stories hidden in the wind and the water. Thank you for exploring these deep historical mysteries with us. If this journey through time has resonated with you, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history, and always remember, no matter how paved over or built up our world becomes, the earth beneath our feet still whispers its sacred stories if we only take a moment to listen.